as we go about this, but we'll go ahead and get started with those that are here. Just for quick introductions, I'm Gabby Geller, the Executive Director of the Jewish Community Relations Bureau, AJC. I sort of think about our work in the community with three categories. So number one being advocacy and political outreach, making sure that our community has strong channels of communication to our elected officials and can advocate on priorities for the Jewish community. Number two, interfaith and intergroup outreach, making sure that we have positive relationships with other faith and minority communities. And then three is education and work around anti-Semitism. So we do a lot of work with students, with schools and teachers, as well as corporations around anti-Semitism, educating people on anti-Semitism, as well as dealing with anti-Semitism when it does occur. And we have an incident report form on our website for that. That was just used this week for some unfortunate flyers that we saw down in Wichita. So we work with law enforcement and media around those issues. So we do a lot for the Jewish community, but I think most importantly with regards to this conversation is understanding our roles as advocates for the Jewish community to our elected officials, as well as making sure that we have those positive relationships with other communities here in Kansas City. And so what does that have to do with immigration and refugees? I am so excited to have this conversation with Hillary Cohen Singer, who is the Executive Director of Jewish Vocational Services. And I'm gonna actually pass it over to her before we really get started and let her introduce herself and her organization as well.
Great. Thanks so much, Gabby. So nice to be with everybody this evening. I have been with Jewish Vocational Service for about 12 years now, and we are connected to the Jewish community, and our work sort of focuses out to the community at large. So Jewish Vocational Service was founded in 1949 to provide support to Holocaust survivors who were coming into the Kansas City area. So our roots really are very connected to the Jewish community and the Jewish immigration experience to the United States. But very shortly after that time, we expanded our services to all returning World War II vets and sort of broadened our scope to anybody that was coming new into our community that needed help integrating into community life. And so that's really what we continue to do today. We primarily work with refugees and immigrants, and our mission is to engage, encourage, and empower people to achieve social, cultural, and economic integration. One of the largest ways that we do that is as a refugee resettlement agency in partnership with our federal government. And we have programming around community integration, around workforce development, and around health and wellness.
Fantastic. And I will just say for all those who are listening in, we really welcome your questions for Hillary. Please feel free to put those in the chat and we will get to them at the end of the conversation. So please do that anytime during the conversation and I'll get those. So Hillary, and I also want, and maybe I can also just do a shout out in terms of your work experience, that Hillary also used to work for the American Jewish Committee, which is our national affiliate. So we have a connection there. And AJC, as well as our local organization, JCRB, AJC, have always been very vocal about our pro-immigration positions. You know, we believe that immigrants and refugees are an asset to American society, and that really any arguments to the contrary are based in bigotry. Economically, they're an asset to our society, socially, culturally, et cetera. And so, Hillary, you mentioned that JVS is obviously the Jewish vocational services and had its roots in welcoming Jewish refugees. What for you is the Jewish part of this job? Why is this a Jewish issue?
Yeah, it's kind of funny because I think for me, it's like, what isn't a Jewish part of this work? For me, there are so many aspects of it that connect to Jewish values, to Jewish history, to Jewish priorities in our community. I mean, I think at sort of a fundamental level, it is a way to live out Jewish values to put into action the idea of welcoming the stranger, of working to repair the world, right? Trying to reach out to people who have been persecuted and help them make their lives better, help them find safety and opportunity. And in terms of the way that JVS orients to the work, right, there's that Rambam Maimonides ladder of charity, right, where the highest level of charity is helping people help themselves. And that's the way we try to, to engage in our work, is working with people to help build their capacity. We talk a lot about self-sufficiency. We talk a lot about what people's goals are for themselves and really helping them figure out how to be in a position to make the choices that they want to make about their world, about their lives. And I think there's something very Jewish in that. There's the historical connection. So being able to sort of pay forward the benefits that the Jewish community has experienced in the United States. It is certainly not perfect. And there are many things, Gabby, right, that you just articulated that the Jewish community continues to struggle with in this country. But I think we've been afforded an opportunity that is maybe unprecedented in history for at least a little while to be successful here. And, I know how grateful I am that my struggles were not the same as my grandparents' struggles, right, when they were making their way in the United States when they first came to this country, and being able to sort of pay that forward to the next group of people that are trying to build lives for themselves. And I think it's connected to the community relations piece that JCRB is so active in. In the course of our work at JVS, advocating for policies that support refugees and immigrants, and just in doing our work and delivering services, we have the opportunity to engage with the mayor's office and our congressional delegation and the Chamber of Commerce, right? And all of these different areas of the city where we can, in a sense, sort of represent the Jewish community in some small way, engaging in civic life, right? Making a contribution to the well-being of the city as a whole. And I think that's important for the Jewish community to be visible as an active member of that. And if we can play a small part in contributing to that effort, I think that's a good thing.
Well, I'm sure
that I think the last thing, oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I'm sure that there are many clients at JVS who don't otherwise have a relationship with the Jewish community. And so maybe their relationship with the JVS, it might be the first time that they've really encountered our community.
Yeah, for a lot of people, they've never met a Jewish person before. And so it gives us an opportunity to build those connections, to build those bridges, to outreach to other faith communities. The clients that we work with are by and large, right, not Jewish. And so whether they're part of the Christian community, whether they're part of the Muslim community, we can, help develop those relationships.
So let's turn our focus to JVS's work at the moment. Tell us, Hillary, what you're seeing on the ground and what, immigrant and refugee populations and communities are facing right now. What's top of mind at JVS?
Yeah, it's been a really fascinating year to be connected to refugee resettlement. Things have been a little slow for a little while, and really in this last year, we have seen things ramp up, I think, because of what we see happening in the international arena, right? Part of what we get to do as a refugee resettlement agency, maybe more now than ever before, is be responsive to things that are happening around the world. So we have spent a significant amount of time and resources and energy responding to the evacuation of our Afghan allies from Afghanistan, who came here to the United States. And that was sort of a whirlwind effort. It happened really fast and in large numbers. And there was a big difference between the volume of work that we had been doing before and the volume of work that we were seeing to do the Afghan resettlement. And so it was very exciting. It happened very fast. And we had lots of community engagement and wonderful volunteers that came to help us out. But we put a significant effort into helping our Afghan neighbors make their home here in the United States, and dealing with the changing sort of policies around, what the eligibility for that group of people is and how they fit into refugee resettlement. The other work that we are starting to ramp up on is support for Ukrainians who are coming into the United States. So those are really the two populations that we're seeing the most sort of effort and energy going into working with them.
So you just, in what you just said, you made it sound like Afghan resettlement might be done. Is that something that was sort of a barrage and then now it's finished, or are you still getting incoming refugees from Afghanistan?
So fingers crossed, we will continue to see folks coming in from Afghanistan. But the way that happened was slightly different than the traditional refugee path. So traditionally, refugees flee their home, they stay in a refugee camp or in a city somewhere for years and years, maybe decades, and then they come to the United States. This was a sudden evacuation of people in large numbers. And so where we are now is that we have made it through what they've called phase 1, which is all of the people who were airlifted out of Kabul in August of 2021. That was about 73,000 people that all came in a very, very small window of time. And so all of those people have been welcomed into communities and are working on, building their lives here. There was a phase 2, and that was people who were evacuated from Kabul but never made it to the United States. So they were in army bases overseas, mostly in the Middle East. And slowly, those folks have come over. What we are hoping for is Afghan resettlement phase 3, which would be family reunification, which would be the folks that were not able to evacuate, were not able to get to the airport in that 3 to 4 day period in August of 2021, that they would be able to rejoin their family members who are here in the United States. I would say a good third of the folks that we welcomed as part of that phase 1 came as men on their own, and left their wives and children back in Afghanistan. If their families were located somewhere in the country where they couldn't safely travel to the airport or couldn't get there in time, there's a lot of family separation, which causes huge amounts of challenges in both countries. And so we're hoping to be able to pick back up on some of that. A lot of that is dependent on our relations with the Taliban, who are currently in control in Afghanistan, and whether or not they'll let folks travel out.
And how many Afghan families or Afghan refugees did you say we've welcomed here in Kansas City?
Yeah, so JVS welcomed 363 people. And our colleagues at the 2 other refugee resettlement agencies in town, Catholic Charities on the Kansas side and Delalam also on the Missouri side, did roughly similar numbers. And so we think all told, we welcomed about 900 some Afghan refugees into Kansas City.
Great. And I'm curious from a policy standpoint. So You know that I actually started my career, my first year of like being a professional was working with immigrants in Chicago, and I was working primarily with Central American immigrants. And that was under the Obama administration. And even during the Obama administration, people working in immigration law and immigration rights were highly critical of a lot of things, in the administration in terms of ability to seek asylum, family reunification, detention, etc. And then we had the Trump administration, and now we have the Biden administration. And I'm curious to pick your brain a little bit about, are there differences between the ways that the current administration is handling these issues versus how you saw the previous administration handling these issues? What does that translate for people on the ground?
Yeah, it's been a little bit of a wild ride to see the ups and downs. Um, I think from an immigration policy perspective, we're seeing a lot of overtures by the Biden administration to focus on adding an element of humaneness into our immigration policy. And that's something that I think we saw diminish during the Trump administration. And so it's coming a little bit in fits and starts, but there are quite a number of changes that the Biden administration are trying to implement to move towards policies that are not punitive, that move to family reunification, that focus on providing people access to things like asylum that international law provides for. I think the closest example for us is what we've seen in the refugee resettlement infrastructure. So it was actually, folks may remember, the first thing that former President Trump did when he got into office in 2017 was the travel ban, which effectively stopped refugee resettlement for about a 3-month period. And then when it resumed, there are lots of other travel restrictions that happened as a result, but for refugee resettlement, after that 3-month sort of limbo, figuring out what that meant, it was supposed to resume the same as it was before. But I will tell you, we did not see any refugees coming into Kansas City from majority Muslim countries, some of them until just this summer. So from 2017 until 2022, we did not welcome a Syrian family. We did not welcome a Somali family into Kansas City during that time. And our experience mirrors that of refugee resettlement agencies in communities across the country. And I think what we saw during those Trump years was an effort to dismantle the refugee resettlement infrastructure, stopping, overseas work, not having agencies staffed as they should be to continue to process things. We saw a reduction in the refugee admission ceiling from in 2016, right before the election, Obama set it at 110,000, which is the highest that it's been since it takes it back to sort of like post-Vietnam era levels. And the smallest year of refugee resettlement was a ceiling of 18,000, where only about 11,000 people came into this country, the historically lowest number of arrivals that there has ever been. So what we're seeing is an effort by the Biden administration to figure out how to give more stability to the refugee resettlement infrastructure, because it doesn't just turn on, right? It got turned off, and then the Biden administration came in and they set a refugee admission ceiling. They jumped it from 18,000 to 62,000, and then the following year to 125,000. And so I think that signaled the will that they had and communicated out the desire that we want to be welcoming to refugees and immigrants, but the will and the ability to actually move that number of people didn't quite match up. So there have been efforts since he came into office to reinvest in infrastructure in refugee resettlement, to reinvest in homeland security and the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services that go out to refugee camps and do what they call circuit rides, right? When people are interviewed to get entry into the United States, they have to be interviewed by this whole huge variety of agencies, but there aren't staff of those agencies at refugee camps on a permanent basis. They travel around every so often to go through and do their interviews. And for a very long time, those circuit rides had stopped. Those built back up again. But it takes time to take people through, right? Because this is it's not a snap your fingers and it happens. There are security checks and medical checks and all kinds of vetting that needs to happen before people can gain entry into the United States. So I think one of the most encouraging thing is that there is an effort to invest in that more. I think the other thing that we're seeing from the Biden administration on this program, as well as others, is an attempt to maybe try and insulate the program from political back and forth. And there is a real effort towards what they're calling community sponsorship and to build support for this work, for connecting people to refugee and immigrant communities, to have, you know, faith communities and other groups really closely connected in the work. Because if there is more public will for the benefits of welcoming people into our country, then maybe it will be less subject to, you know, the ebbs and flows of politics.
That would be nice. And I feel like in so many American communities, the will is there. But you're right, it has been sort of a political football as of late, which I can see it would be really problematic for the just logistics of running that program. I'm also curious, you talked about getting ready to hopefully welcome some Ukrainian refugees. So talk to us a little bit more about that, if you can. I'm curious as well, how do I phrase this? I'm curious if realistically there is a different reception politically that you find between, for example, refugees from Syria or refugees from Afghanistan versus refugees from Ukraine. I think we saw that conversation happening, at least in Europe, in terms of Ukrainian refugees being white and having a different reception than refugees from Middle Eastern countries in Europe. And I'm curious if you've seen that at all in your work here.
Yeah, so the Ukrainian situation is really interesting because the administration is going about it differently than traditional refugee resettlement, and also differently than the Afghan resettlement, right? Both the Afghan and the Ukrainian situations are US responses sort of in the moment to a crisis that is new and sort of happening right now. It's a direct response, but the tactics that they're using are very different. So for Afghans, they were transported here, like literally by the US government in US military planes, right? We brought them here and then made them eligible for all kinds of benefits that they should rightly be, entitled to being here in the United States so that they can, comfortably live their lives. But it's working a little bit differently for the Ukrainian resettlement, and they're really focusing on that community connection and the family reunification. So if you are Ukrainian and you want to come to the United States for anything longer than a tourist visa, the only way you can come is if a group of people in the United States chooses to sponsor you. You can't come through the regular refugee resettlement program. There is no pathway, there are no visas, other than if a community group sponsors you. And so our role in this is slightly different. Typically, we get notices of people's flights and we find an apartment and we furnish it and we pick people up at the airport. And that's not the way that it's going with Ukrainian resettlement. They want to make sure that everybody who comes into the country has somebody in the United States that is not, right, where it's not their job, right? A member of the community here that is looking out for their welfare, that is helping them adjust, and also is making a financial commitment to help support them as they're coming here into the United States. It's a temporary status, so they're only able to come here for 2 years. I think the hope, right, is that things in Ukraine will calm down and a large number of people will want to and be able to return home. So our role in that, we are seeing lots of Ukrainians come into Kansas City, but it is mostly people who have a family member here, have a friend here, somebody who is vouching for them and is bringing them over. And then we are able to help them navigate all of the benefits that they're entitled to, help with medical screenings, help get them the insurance that they need, provide support finding a job, provide support around their employment authorization documents, a whole host of things. And so we can sort of come in as a support after they get here, but we're not the agency that's sort of bringing them over.
And is it like you said, it's just people who have a personal connection to a Ukrainian refugee, or are there sort of like synagogues or churches who are looking to just sponsor people and are connecting with organizations in Ukraine?
I think it's both. I think it started out, the first wave of applications were people whose sibling, whose parent, whose cousin, right, were still in Ukraine. And this was a way for them to say, hey, you can come with me, you can, we'll come live in my basement or whatever it is. And there's a way for them to stay in the United States with legal status, with the ability to work, right? So it gave people a way to bring their family members over in a way that was sustainable. I think we are starting to see efforts by mostly faith communities, synagogues and churches, to put groups together to help contribute to this effort. But I think along the lines of what you were talking about earlier about maybe the disparities in the way that we think about Ukrainian refugees and other refugee groups. I was talking actually to one of our funders and explaining how this, they call it U for You, Uniting for Ukraine, how this U for You program works. And if you don't want to be, right, you had to flee your country, it's not safe for people in Ukraine, they have this way to come and be here legally with their family. And his response was, it would be really nice if we had the same kind of opportunities available for folks from Central America who are putting their lives at tremendous risk at the opportunity to present themselves at our southern border and request asylum, and in lots of ways being pushed back, especially right now. So not only is there no formal pathway, right, there's no, right, we're not making this nice, easy process to help facilitate that and opening up government, opening up benefits and putting resources behind it and things like that. We are at the present moment, our borders are still closed. We are still turning back asylum seekers.
We're still turning back asylum seekers. So I feel like maybe given everything that's been going on with Afghanistan and Ukraine, the southern border has sort of dropped from the conversation. Is there anything you want to add or just talk about in terms of what the current state is with immigrants and refugees at the southern border?
Yeah, I think I think it's true that there's two parts of it, right? There's what grabs our attention, and then there's what's happening on the ground. And I think what grabs our attention have been other things lately, but there's quite a bit that's happening on the ground in terms of Central American migration, and also efforts by the Biden administration to try and fix some of the things that have been broken about that system. So the administration actually has done quite a few things to try and relieve the pressure there and create opportunities for people to seek safety. One of the things that the Biden administration did that, I don't know, you may remember because it was an Obama era program, it's called the Central American Minors Program. And it was a program through refugee resettlement that said, typically you have to flee your country in order to qualify for refugee resettlement, present yourself to the United Nations High Commission on Refugees. This said, no, you can stay in country, right? Because there were so many unaccompanied minors coming to the southern border. And this said, kids can stay in their country, they can apply for family reunification. So if they have a parent or a legal guardian in the United States, they can apply for the program in country. When they get approved, they can travel to the United States and have all of the refugee resettlement benefits without having to go through the crazy process. Because before that, there was no way to apply for refugee resettlement. Your options were stay where you are or travel to the southern border and present yourself to Border Patrol and say, I'm being persecuted, I would like asylum. And so the Obama administration started that program. It had some challenges, so it never super took off the ground. The Trump administration canceled it completely. And so it stopped in 2017. And then the Biden administration resuscitated it so that there can be this pathway. And it is still sort of gearing up, but when it operated from 2015 to 2017, JVS never saw a single person come through that program that was destined for Kansas City. And now I think we are now up to 3 unaccompanied minors who are, kids who have traveled to reunify with their families through this Central American minors program, which is not a giant amount, but it's a start, it's something. And I think it shows the will to try and fix this really intractable problem. Last year, so FY21, 145,000 kids presented themselves at the southern border seeking asylum, went on the most perilous journey because they felt like they had no other option to save their own lives. And they are the only group that actually can get through the border right now. So those 145,000, because through a variety of programs, our borders have been shut. And the Biden administration is trying to reverse a couple of those things. So the migrant protection protocols that said if you come and you seek asylum, traditionally you come and you say, I've been persecuted, and then you're granted entry into the United States to await the adjudication of your case. But those migrant protection protocols, they're also known as the Remain in Mexico policy, said, okay, we'll take your name and stuff, but wait in Mexico, hang out there for a couple of years, doing whatever. And when we're ready, we'll let you know and we'll tell you if you can come into the United States. And it puts people in tremendous amount of peril. So there were efforts on that, and there were efforts to end Title 42, which was the COVID protections, saying that people couldn't come into the United States to seek asylum. The efforts are being thwarted a bit in the courts, but the administration is definitely trying.
145,000 in 1 year. Yeah, that's a lot. I feel like I could pick your brain all night. There's one question I want to ask you before we turn it over to audience questions. And I have one so far, but I'd encourage anybody who has questions for Hillary, go ahead and put those in the chat to me. And we'll get to them very, very soon. So my last question for you, Hillary, was talking about advocacy opportunities. You know, as we've just heard from you for the past half hour, what happens on a policy level does directly affect human beings' lives on the ground. And we see that in terms of the individuals and families who are coming into Kansas City as well, and your ability to help them as well, the resources that your organization, you know, has to do that. What advocacy opportunities are there for both organizations and individuals around these issues of refugees and immigration? What's going on right now in Congress that our voices can be helpful? You know, it's very easy for all of us as individuals to pick up the phone and call our members of Congress and just say, hey, this is a bill that I'm concerned about as a constituent. And I'm, you know, everyone on this call knows they write those down. Those calls actually do make an impact when they hear from their constituents, and it takes about 2 minutes, 3 minutes of our day to do that. So what are the legislative issues that you're seeing that we could be helpful in advocating for right now?
Yeah, so I think there are a couple. I think the one that we deal with every year at just about this time is the presidential determination on refugee admissions. So the refugee resettlement program is a one-year program that needs to get reauthorized every year. And the way that that happens is the president puts together a report and it analyzes everything that's going on overseas. What are our foreign policy interests in helping to bring refugees to the United States? What's our capacity in our community to welcome folks? And it comes up with a number, and that's the ceiling. So it doesn't mean that we'll get to that number, but it means that's the ceiling for the number of refugees that will be admitted into the United States every year. And the president presents that to Congress, and then Congress needs to ratify that. And so as we start hearing that the presidential determination is about to come out, that's a really good time to do some advocacy to our members of Congress to say, hey, this presidential determination is coming out. You should take a look at it. We support refugees and immigrants here in our community. We see how they enrich our economy, our culture, right? That they're a benefit to our community, and we are supportive of that, so that that passes through Congress, you know, quickly and smoothly. I think the second issue is slightly more challenging, and it does have to do with the Afghan parolees who came into this country after the evacuation there. So the way that they came into the United States, their technical legal immigration status is as a parolee. That's their, you know, has nothing to do with like prison and parole. That's their immigration status. And that is a temporary status. It is usually used in emergency situations when somebody needs to come into the United States very quickly. And so they're able to grant this quick sort of emergency visa. But it only lasts for 2 years. This is actually the way that refugees from Vietnam came into the United States, was first as parolees. And then Congress passed something called the Vietnam Adjustment Act that said, hey, everybody who came as parolees, we know that you are not going to be able to go back to Vietnam. And we welcome you to stay in this country on a permanent basis with a permanent ability to work and a path to citizenship. And advocates have been working really since August of 2021 to advocate for an Afghan Adjustment Act that would provide that same security and sense of permanency to Afghan evacuees, because as it stands now, we're almost, just about a year in. And so folks have a year left before their legal presence in the United States expires. So advocates are pushing for either a standalone Afghan Adjustment Act that would say, you can stay in the United States, you can continue to work, we'll provide a path to citizenship, because I think nobody thinks that Afghanistan will be a safe place for people to return to anytime soon, if you've provided support for US forces. So that's really not a realistic possibility for folks that have come here. So either to pass that as a standalone bill, or the latest that we've heard from the advocacy community is that there is a chance that they will pass it as part of the defense spending bill that should be coming up in the Senate in the fall. They tried to get it attached to a number of bills over the course of the last year. It was part of the omnibus spending package, and then somebody said, nope, we can't pass the bill with this thing on it, and so they took it away. So we're hoping that enough will has been developed, and enough people have engaged with our Afghan neighbors that they will call their congresspeople and say, these are our friends and our neighbors, and they go to school with our kids, and we work alongside them, and you need to provide them with a way to stay in this country.
I'm honestly, I don't know if I should say I'm surprised, just given what the political climate is, but I am kind of surprised that that hasn't been passed already, just because I thought at least that support for Afghan refugees there was some sort of consensus for it. When that conversation was happening, at least it felt like that. Do you know what the pushback politically has been against doing that?
Sort of. I mean, it's also puzzling to me. I mean, we literally brought them here ourselves, right? Like in a way that we don't.
What are we going to do with them in a year? Like a solution has to be formulated.
Right. Something has to get worked out, and I think, it's not that I think anybody thinks that in 2 years ICE is going to come around and deport Afghan refugees, but citizenship, a path to citizenship is a funny thing, right? There is a difference between saying, we will welcome you here and we'll provide you support. But it is different to say, we want you to be a citizen, we want you to vote, right? It creates it complicates our already complicated electoral politics, right? So I think that's part of it. Part of it is also grandstanding, probably a little bit, to say that you have a hard line on at least something to do with immigration, right? They didn't ask Congress to approve evacuating the Afghans, right? That was an executive branch decision. And so now that Congress is playing a role, they're looking at things differently. I don't think it makes much sense.
Okay.
Especially given their connection to our military, right? The strongest advocates that we have, that we have heard from, are members of the veterans community.
Which makes sense. Okay. All right. So it sounds like both the, let's see, I wrote this down, the presidential determination on refugee admissions, as well as talking to our members of Congress about getting a permanent status adjustment for Afghan evacuees. Is there a bill that you want us to mention when we're calling our members of Congress, or just talk to them about the necessity of passing some sort of permanent status adjustment for Afghans?
Yeah, so it's just some sort of permanent status at this point in time. There is not even a bill to reference. We are hoping that language around this will be added into the Defense Spending Act, but that has not yet been drafted or made public.
Got it. Okay, that's super helpful. Thank you, Hillary. So moving on to, I've got a couple of questions from the audience, and folks, please feel free to continue sending these in. Someone says that they know of someone who wishes to host a Ukrainian family here in KC and has the resources to do so. What steps can they take to help make this possible?
Yeah, so two things. You can Google United for Ukraine, and there is a whole page. It's through the Department of Homeland Security, and there's a ton of resources on there about what this sponsorship program looks like, how it works, what the process is, what the commitments are on the part of the sponsor. And so you can go there to learn about that program. And then you can also call JVS as you are thinking about taking that step. If you would like to learn about the resources that we can provide to help the family once they're here in Kansas City. Okay,
fantastic. And then, do you think that we will ever see many Syrian refugee families come to Kansas City in the next year or two?
Yeah, so I am hopeful that we will. We resettled, we welcomed maybe a month ago, the first Syrian family since 2016. Wow. So they came here, and we have a Syrian Kurdish family that is expected to come like mid-August. So we are slowly starting to see that movement happening, which would be a huge development, because right, the situation in Syria is just as untenable as it was before, and there are at this point hundreds of thousands of people who have been living in refugee camps without the ability to sort of see any hope. Right? We know that 100,000 Syrian refugees are not going to come into the United States in a year, but I think one of the things that is really important about refugee resettlement and about America's role in refugee resettlement is that it provides that ability to hope, right? To hope for a better future, to see a light at the end of the tunnel of what might be a really bleak situation. And so while we can't help everyone, being able to help some people, I think does lift the burden on lots of people who want to see that there might be an end to the situation that they're in.
Absolutely. And maybe that's a good note to end this conversation on. If we don't have any other questions, we might let you guys go just a couple minutes early, but I think leaving on that note of hope is important. And I'm just so grateful for all of the work that JVS is doing in the community. And as you said, to sort of bring it back to the very beginning of this conversation, doing on behalf of the Jewish community. You know, it really is a fulfillment of our values, and it's so important for our community to be seen doing this kind of work and acting on our values out there in the broader community. And so we're just so grateful for the way that JBS represents the Jewish community in Kansas City. We're definitely sending you out with some action items. Please call your members of Congress and talk to them about these issues that Hillary discussed, the finding permanent status adjustment for Afghan evacuees, as well as advocating for a high cap on the presidential determination on refugee admissions that happens towards the end of the year. Your advocacy really can make a difference to people's lives. So I would definitely encourage everyone to use their voices. And Hillary, was there anything else that you wanted to add before we head out?
I think just a huge thanks to you, Gabby, and to JCRB AJC for being fantastic partners with us in this work, and for providing the forum for us to share a little bit about it tonight.
Wonderful. Okay, well, have a wonderful night, everyone, and call your members of Congress. Thank you, Hillary. Bye.
Thank you.